So my name is Jennifer Terlick, and I'm here to talk today about AI, climate, and education. And really excited to be here with you all today. I'm going to be talking about a couple of key topics. First, an introduction. Second, an overview of AI and climate, looking at the climate harms of AI, the potential climate benefits of AI, the net climate impact of AI, and then why this matters for education and example activities and resources. And we'll also have a Q&A period at the end. So let's start with the introduction. I'm from Toronto, Canada. That's where I am today. And one day while working in kids' education, I woke up to this. The sky was orange and we weren't allowed to go outside. And several kids that I was working with asked me why they couldn't go outside. And I didn't really have a solid answer for them other than, uh-oh, the generations above you really messed this up. I didn't say that, of course, but it motivated me I'd consulted in climate, I'd angel invested in climate, but I ended up moving into working in climate change and mostly in climate change education. So my background, I'm an educator and ed tech entrepreneur. I'm a lecturer at MIT and an executive fellow at Harvard Business School. I teach about AI and climate at both places and also taught as part of the Google Data Center Community AI Fellowship. I co-founded one of the first maker spaces for kids, which during COVID morphed into a virtual or hybrid company offering programs on coding, robotics, and Minecraft for kids, and ended up raising venture capital and exiting through acquisition. I've also been practice leader of climate and energy AI at MIT's Entrepreneurship Center, where I built, researched, and instructed AI for climate and energy solutions. And I did the mid-career MIT Sloan Fellows MBA program and cross-registered at Hugsy in Professor Doctorman's class on scaling impact, which was amazing. I'm also a climate tech venture investor, and I've been a board member, mentor, advisor, author, and speaker, most recently speaking on AI and climate for different organizations like the United Nations Principles of Responsible Management Education at COP, Davos, TEDx, and so forth. And very excited to be here with you. So just wanted to provide a bit of a background on myself. So why are we here? Well, I have some friends and family members who've had babies, and I was shopping in the MIT Museum for books for them. And what did I think about buying? AI for babies and climate change for babies. I haven't gifted them yet, but I see these as two of the most important topics. What are kids' lives going to look like as they grow up with AI and climate? And so the learning objectives for today are to establish the problem and potential directions for solutions of environmental considerations around AI, connect that to education, and then provide resources for continuing this conversation outside of the session. I love this quote from Nelson Mandela, which you're probably all familiar with, which says that education is the most powerful weapon that you can use to change the world. And I really believe that's true, especially at the intersection of AI and climate. Some of you folks may have heard recently 27 Pacific Islander law students ended up bringing and winning the largest climate change law decision at the International Court of Justice. And also some young activists in Hawaii won a big settlement, and then Hawaii has committed to their first net zero plan. So I think youth have an incredible power and standing to make a difference. Of course, this isn't legal advice, but you all can help empower them and other groups to make a difference in climate and also set them up in this time of eco-anxiety as well for how to think about things. So let's talk about an overview of AI and climate. You may all be familiar, AI is contributing to climate change. We hear about this in the news a lot, but it could also maybe reduce climate change. There's different events like AI for climate, and I see AI for climate as a double-edged sword, where AI is both using energy, but it also has the potential to help possibly reduce some of the emissions from energy. So this was part of my thesis on the net climate impact of AI at MIT. I worked with Professor John Sturman looking at this issue through a system dynamics lens, as well as developing a series of equations to help quantify both sides of that, the benefits as well as the harms of AI, to determine where we might net out. So let's first take a look at the climate harms of AI. According to Stockholm Resilience Center, 7 out of 9 planetary boundaries have been crossed already. I'm not a climate scientist, so I'm not going to go in depth into this chart, but just to highlight a couple things, you can see, carbon dioxide concentration, which is around emissions, is outside of the safe operating space, as are land system use, freshwater use, and ocean acidification and other issues. Back in 2007, I believe 4 out of the 9 boundaries had been crossed. So you can see we're starting to cross them quite quickly. And then enter AI. So I'm curious to hear from some of you. What have you heard about some of the climate harms of AI, and how harmful are they? Maybe we could hear a couple folks, like 10 to 30 seconds each. Feel free to popcorn style, just answer out loud.
So I have mics to pass around if folks also want to. Nice.
Feel like maybe last summer or a year ago, a lot of Instagram graphics about water usage, like a bottle of water per ChatGPT search. But I feel like I've also heard or read that it's just really hard. It's very harmful, but very hard to quantify that harm.
Exactly. Others?
I've heard of the data centers being running in back of people's homes, and then they get like 24-hour light, and it's affecting like everything about their life, their lifestyle.
Absolutely. And maybe one more?
Thank you. I've heard, and maybe I could use some verification on this, that it uses immense amounts of power, right? But specifically it causes power spikes, and that renewable is not necessarily suited for power spikes as much as fossil fuels are. They're more reactive. So therefore, the kinds of energy demands that AI put on a grid might encourage more fossil fuel usage.
Exactly. Okay, so great. You folks have some great background knowledge on this. Just so we're all on the same page, I'll go through some of the harms. I boil them down into emissions, air pollution from emissions, noise. Data centers are quite noisy. There's also a high use of critical minerals. There's a lot of water used, as was pointed out. There's hazardous waste from chips, and then there's also a lot of land use. So these are some of the climate harms. There's also others, and there's societal harms as well. Now let's try and put some quantification to that. So currently data centers are around 2% of energy demand. According to different estimates, they could grow to 5 to 9% of electricity generation by 2030, or according to some MIT estimates, perhaps up to 21% by 2030 when the cost of delivering AI to customers is factored in. That sounds pretty crazy, except when you realize that that's already starting to happen. So in Ireland, data centers guzzle up to 1/5 of the country's electricity, and they're projected to devour nearly 1/3 of it. 1/3. And AI was only, brought to fruition a couple years ago. So it's crazy to think about. Now, where are these harms coming from? The AI Now Institute breaks them down into 3 areas: infrastructure, hardware, and software. So infrastructure like the data centers, hardware like the chips, and software like the software that's used to train and use AI systems. And in case you're interested in some fun facts to share with your friends or family, the training process for an AI model alone consumed enough to power about 120 average US homes for a year. So this is, training a model like OpenAI's GPT, for example. And not all models are created equally. So we can see here that, let's say, OpenAI's GPT-3, like I mentioned, this is the carbon emissions, tons of CO2 equivalent, about 588. But then when we can look at Meta's Llama, it's almost 9,000. And this graphic also has some comparisons to air travel or human life. That would be way down around the bottom here. So these AI models are taking up a huge amount of emissions. There's also a variation of emissions based on usage tasks. So text classification uses the least emissions, whereas things like image generation and video generation use the most. I'm just providing an overview as part of this, but I'm also going to provide the slides which have the links in case you're curious to learn more about any of these various aspects. You may have heard a ChatGPT query consumes about 5 to 10 times more electricity than a simple web search. And some of you may have noticed that today, when you do a Google search, automatically it includes AI, and it's a bit hard to turn off. I've heard if you put -AI at the end of your query, it can turn it off. So creating an image with AI uses the energy equivalent of fully charging a smartphone. So is it worth it to create a cute picture of a cat with AI? Who knows? Very difficult ethical question. And there's also water usage. So a mid-sized data center consumes around as much water as 1,000 US households a day. This makes data centers already among the top 10 water users in America's industrial and commercial sectors. So that's a brief overview of the climate harms. I have a longer presentation in case you're keen to hear more. But now let's turn to the potential climate benefits of AI. So I'm curious to hear from you. What are some of the areas you're excited about or that you've heard about where AI could potentially benefit the climate? And have you heard anything about how beneficial they could be, like any quantification of those numbers?
Well, I have a friend who works in like she's a PhD student for like marine biology, and she says that using AI was helpful in like speeding up the process of learning more about like bacteria and like advancing research in that area and that could potentially be helpful in the field of biology. That was like one of the few ways, but she says that as a marine biologist, she's really conscious about her AI usage and she only uses it for mass data filtering. So
Excellent point. Others?
Um, I'm not sure about quantification, but I have heard some people say that the kind of demand is, or AI is creating this demand for energy that is then helping drive the renewable transition by kind of ensuring that that energy demand will be there for the foreseeable future in large amounts.
Great. And maybe one more?
I could go, but I feel like that'd be cheating because I took your course.
Go ahead, Clover. Let's hear one.
Well, we discussed in the course that there are ways to create tools using AI that directly help with environmental outcomes. And then if you do the trade-offs, like in the net climate impact of using that tool versus what that tool serves, even though the tool uses AI, it might overall reduce environmental impact. For example, a tool that you made that would help people calculate costs, environmental costs for a trip they may take, and give them all the options that would reduce the carbon footprint by the most amount possible.
Thanks so much for sharing, folks. So interesting. It sounds like you've heard about some neat areas for sure. And some of the AI solutions that I'm most excited about are demand response as better matching the supply of energy, supply and demand of energy. So you can think about, let's say, 10 EVs all drive home to the same neighborhood and plug in at the same time. It could create a peak load of energy that the grid may not be able to handle. Typical response for that would be to build out further infrastructure, but that takes a long time. In fact, it takes an average of 1 to 15 years to add a renewable source of energy like wind or solar to the grid. So as I think was pointed out, renewable energy can't keep up with the expansion of AI. But if AI was installed at the site and everyone plug their cars in at 6 p.m., the AI could help charge the cars at different times so everyone could wake up with their cars charged, and we wouldn't need to add more physical grid infrastructure and could perhaps meet the climate goals faster, saving time and money. Also, energy efficiency. Buildings are 40% of emissions according to different estimates, and AI can help make their energy more efficient. AI can help inform policy. It can see all the different policies that exist and help suggest which ones are needed in different areas. It can do predictive maintenance. For example, with solar panels, it's hard for humans to be able to detect which ones are broken. We can't really fly over them that easily. But if there's drone footage and machine learning applied to the images, it can easily showcase which ones are broken or will be. AI can also be great for material science discovery, providing innovations that humans may not be able to come to by themselves. And it can also be great for prediction and optimization of things like renewable energy. So if we have better predictions, maybe we don't need as much non-renewable energy like oil, coal, or gas. But despite all these benefits, some of the best predictions we have are from Microsoft and PricewaterhouseCoopers, which consider a variety of factors, and they predict that AI could reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by only 1.5 to 4% by 2030. So that's a pretty small amount. So now let's take a look at the net climate impact of AI. So this is one of the equations we developed. It's equal to AI's climate harms minus AI's climate benefits at a given time. So a cost benefit analysis. But we also need to consider a couple different factors. There's a lot of inefficient AI chips out there, and although new AI chips that are more efficient are being developed, that doesn't mean they're all automatically going to replace the existing ones. Kind of like the introduction of electric vehicles didn't automatically replace gas cars. There's also the time value of carbon, which says that a ton of carbon emitted today will have a much bigger impact than a ton emitted a year from now because it'll be in the atmosphere that much longer. So we're emitting now with AI, but its benefits are kind of speculative. And then there's Jevons paradox, which says that even if there's increased efficiency, that may paradoxically lead to more use, which would outpace the AI's efficiency gains, so more emissions. On the positive side, there's load flexibility. So a Duke study showed how data centers could perhaps help with that supply and demand of energy. And one of the best studies in this area is through International Energy Agency. It showed that in most of its future scenarios, AI will increase emissions. They did show one scenario here, which showed that it would greatly decrease emissions, which sounds great, until you read that it says it's vital to note that there's currently no momentum that could ensure the widespread adoption of these AI applications. So I'm curious to hear a vote from you folks by hand raise of who will be the guardians of AI's climate impacts, government, business, or civil society / NGOs. And maybe we could include education as part of that last group. So hands up for government. Hands up for business.
You mean what do we think will happen or what should happen?
What do you think will happen? Good question. What do you think will happen?
Okay.
So let's go again. Government. Hands up for government. Hands up for business. And hands up for civil society / NGOs / education. Nice. One of the top climate AI researchers I know, I watched her raise her hand for that last one, so I agree. And then where will the change come from in terms of reducing AI's climate impacts? Will it come from technology, policy / law, or finance? Or let's add education to that as well. So let's start with technology, policy / law, finance,
Hard to
and education. Nice. I agree. Education. Well, it's hard to say. Like, this is all a future predicting exercise, but it's an interesting quandary to think about. So how do we address this ethical tension? We have on the one hand, AI is awesome. It can help with so many things. On the other hand, climate is already hurting and AI is hurting it more. Well, we can look at constraints and frameworks to help address the ethical tension. There's this great graphic from Harvard, which talks about Jeffrey Saviano, which is a pyramid of ethical progression. It starts at the bottom as non-compliance with laws, and then reactive compliance or basic compliance with laws. But then how can we go above that to be ethical stewards and provide examples that other people can follow? Well, unfortunately, looking at the base of the pyramid, there's limited legislation. So the EU and the US have introduced some legislation regarding the environmental impact of AI, but those policies are few and far between. There's omissions and gaps, and although governments are developing AI strategies, most of them don't include climate, and that's incredibly dangerous. So there's not that much in the way of AI and environment in law currently. But there's opportunities for improvement in 4 key areas: hardware, software, infrastructure, and policy. And some of the recommendations from my thesis are to boost software and hardware efficiency, transition more to renewables, address ethics, and consider the net climate impact of actions. For policymakers, it's to do things like implement carbon pricing, which can be beneficial across not just AI, but other areas, require disclosure of AI's use and impact, regulate AI's emissions, and also support research and development, training and education, and greening the grid. And then for researchers, is to push for sustainability metrics, consider the net climate impact of projects, use more efficient software and hardware, and then conduct further research and education on AI and climate. You may, and looking at the ethics, the top of the pyramid that I showed, there's these frameworks around responsible AI, most of which include terms like these: transparency and explainability, reliability and safety, fairness, inclusiveness, privacy and security, human oversight, and accountability. But I would argue we need to work towards climate responsible AI and include sustainability at the base of all that. If you thought all that was a bit esoteric, then let me highlight this example. Texas actually has some of the most renewable energy in the states, despite having an ideology which one may not initially associate with renewable energy. And I think that's because, in the immortal words of that one song, renewable energy could be considered harder, better, faster, stronger, and I would add cheaper. So it's possible if we make AI more efficient, more less emissions, companies will just switch to that to save money. So we can look for AI projects and pathways where the climate benefits exceed the climate harms, and look for projects at the intersection of AI capabilities, business value, and climate impact. Now, why this matters for education. I started developing this AI climate systems map, and let me explain it to you. So I think that the impacts, so emissions and climate impacts, are influenced by system behavior like AI's harms and benefits, which is influenced by implementation of things like the software, hardware, and infrastructure. Also, that's influenced by interventions like policy, technology, education, which is then influenced by mindsets and skills. So morals, soft skills, hard skills, relationships. And all of this is influenced by leverage points. And that's where I think education comes in. This is looking at paradigms shifting, education, information flows, and goals. So I think education can change this whole system map. And it's one of various methods of influence. I like this advocacy strategy framework, which shows different types of strategies, from public education here, which can provide awareness to the public, all the way up to litigation, which can provide action for decision makers, and then policymaker education and everything in between. And Albert Einstein said, we can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And I think that's certainly true here as well. So if you want to think about how can you reduce the climate impact of your AI use in schools, it would be a couple things: to use it less, use a different type of task, like a smaller task, use a different, more efficient model, Arguably, in the prompt, you could ask AI to limit its work or output, but it's hard to know what's going on behind the scenes. And then you could use hardware on a greener grid or greener energy. And there's also other ideas as well. So now let's go over some example activities and resources. This is a part I'm very excited to share with you. So first, there's this climate Venn diagram, which I showcase in my courses. It's kind of like the Japanese Ikigai concept. So it's looking at what's at the intersection of what brings you joy, what are you good at, and what work needs doing. That's your climate action. So that can be something helpful for students to think about. Another is zines. So we did a zines activity at MIT Museum where teens came and listened to a version of the talk I provided at the outset here on the net climate impact of AI, and then they made a zine. So this is an example one. Climate and AI. Before I came here, I didn't know much about AI and climate. I was looking forward to learning more. I learned about the emissions. The more we use, the more harmful it is to the environment. And some of the students also put some actions they wanted to take. There's also this great tool from MIT called Maclea, which is kind of like Scratch or drag and drop coding, but for AI. And it has some great definitions as well. Like AI is what gives computers the ability to think, and machine learning is under the AI and it creates the actual thinking process. It also talks about how models are what hold the brain for AI, and neural networks are the brain of AI. And it talks about definitions of other neural networks. And as I said, I'll share these slides in the links. Also, MIT has a great resource. It's an ethics of AI curriculum for middle school students. That's from the Media Lab. It includes graphics like this one. AI has 3 parts: a data set, a learning algorithm, and prediction, with an example being an Instagram ad where it looks at the data of the clicks you've done. It goes through a learning algorithm to determine what you will click on. This is an AI canvas that I use for teaching, where people can create, for example, a vacation itinerary generator and put in what would be the user inputs, what would be the information that you tell the AI system, and then what would be the outputs, and what data can you use to help spice it up and make it more proprietary. And then you can use that in a system like Stack AI, which is a no-code drag and drop AI system, where you can see it has those inputs, the LLM, the output, and then you can add some data. There's also a great tool called Teachable Machine, which is a no-code way to build a neural network. So here I've built that solar panel classification project that I mentioned, where you can put in images of clean and damaged solar panels. And then when you add new images, it tells you if it's damaged or not. For my sustainable AI course, the assessments were to create a sustainable AI project, develop a vision for sustainable AI and your role within it, and your ethical principles with respect to climate and AI, and then to build a project based on making AI more sustainable, either a tech prototype, a policy proposal, framework, venture concept, art piece, or something else. And then here's some educational resources on climate and energy. Climate Fresque, which is a card system for outlining the causes of climate change and the impacts. Drawdown Explorer, which shows the top climate solutions, and Solutions the Game, which gamifies that. There's also a physical version of this. CredC's Minecraft World of Power, I find is really neat. It shows, like, for example, a solar farm. There's also Snap Circuits Green Energy, where you can show like windmill turbines and such. And then CredC's energy simulators, which are interactive ways to show energy systems. And there's En-ROADS, which is MIT's climate policy simulator, where you can pull different levers to see how that might impact temperature and see, do EVs really make a difference, or is it more about something else, for example? And then just wrapping up here, some other resources are my recordings of my Sustainable AI course that Clover took, including a speaker session on how to make an infographic about AI and climate from climate artist Nicole Kellner. I also have recordings for my AI for Energy Solutions course. And to sum up, what we do matters. It will take a variety of stakeholders, including the groups we discussed before, plus consumers, activist groups, as well as graduates of programs like MBA, law, education, and so forth. We also have a role of employees, so how we manage, influence, and work with organizations we work with. So some of the students from my class are now working on helping their universities become more sustainable with respect to AI. It's up to us. We need to steer AI in the right way. I don't think we can put up our hands and say, oh, AI is so advanced now, it's going to solve it. We need to shape and control it. And hopefully it's not too late to do that. Also, as a benefit, according to a Yale study, taking action in climate can help reduce eco-anxiety, and we can provide that opportunity for students as well. So let's work together to make our world a better place, knowing that there is no planet B, at least currently, that we're aware of. And here's my resources, including my thesis report on the net climate impact of AI, as well as those course recordings and some recordings of various talks that I've given. And now I'm happy to answer any questions.